No galactic history class is complete without a discussion of the destruction of Terra. Little was known about the Terrans before they were wiped out. They were very good at building spaceships and missiles. They were very good at killing people, and they were not very good at translating the many apologies that were sent their way. They were like a group of hornets. Hornets with nukes. We had stepped on their nest and we would pay. There wasn't any way to make them listen, to make them stop. When we saw what they did to Holdoli 2, we realized that they would destroy us if we did not destroy them. They didn't make it easy, but we had the advantage, in numbers and in technology. I say we here, but we weren't alive at the time. That was thousands of years ago. Our ancestors learned the hard way that you only get one first impression. Needless to say, mining ships are now required to manually survey planets before they point lasers at them. I paused my lecture to look at my younger brother, hunched over his datapad, eyes glazed over. "Are you getting this? Or do I need to repeat something?" I asked, just a hint of annoyance sneaking into my tone. Yeah, I'm listening," he muttered, clearly not listening. His attention was fully on the display of his datapad, where some scantily clad female was emoting animatedly. She seemed to be watching a horror-themed vid playing in the corner of the datapad. She screamed every time the monster flickered across the screen. Her legs flailed in what was almost certainly an artificial reaction, and her thin, tight robe outlined her thoracic claws in a way that was almost indecent. I shook my head to clear out any lingering distraction and addressed my brother. "You're the one who wanted help with your assignment. If you're busy, I'm not going to waste my time trying to talk to you. Come get me when you're ready to listen." I heard some mumbled indignant protest as I skittered back to my lair, but I chose not to engage. I was mature enough to know when not to escalate. And besides, time spent arguing was time spent away from the forums. I like to think that my role as a sub-forum vice-overseer is important. For no pay or reward, I spend my days in service of my fellow forum users, making sure that the rules are adhered to. I know people like me are the subject of criticism, and more than a few jokes are made at our expense, but I find enjoyment from my position. Enough enjoyment to exceed the embarrassment from the insults. I sat down and pulled up my datapad, opening the forums. A number of alerts greeted me. Several posts required overseer review, a handful of membership requests, and one ban request after a heated political debate in the Holodihan Sea Slug Identification subforum. Some forum dweller had made a joke comparing the name of the Alliance Chancellor to the name of a particularly crusty species. It only got worse from there. I'll be honest, I don't particularly like the Chancellor, but the subforum rules explicitly ban political comments. For a first infraction, 30 Galactic Standard Hour ban. I worked my way through the list until I found myself at the last. A post awaiting overseer approval on the Species of the Alliance forum. It mainly exists to help galactic citizens keep up to date with all of the intelligent lifeforms they might meet in the galaxy. Since the Alliance had begun expanding, not a year had gone by without someone new joining the fold. Because the forum is entirely devoted to discussions about species, allowing jokes on the forum would be wildly inappropriate, and the post he was looking at was probably the most distasteful prank he had ever seen. There was an image of a field with a primitive landing craft, probably cropped in. 3 figures stood near it in large environmental isolation suits. 5-limbed, bipedal isolation suits. To be fair, calling the top projection a limb might be a little misleading. It had more in common with one of my own sensory bulbs than a leg. They were obviously Terrans. The caption was a simple request. "These guys showed up in my field. The translator app on my datapad can't figure out what language they're using. Can anyone help?" The verdict was simple. Permanent ban. I may have been inclined to let them off with a warning on account of being a first-time poster in the subforum, but the ban policy was clear when it came to pranks and jokes. Also, imaging someone without their consent was technically a criminal offense, although if they were on his property like he claimed, it wouldn't have been a problem. And additionally, the subforum wasn't a Q&A board. It was a place to post information and find information, not to fill with inane requests, especially of the offensive prank variety. I stretched out my legs and began to scroll through posts, searching for something interesting to read. I was blissfully unaware that I was the second person in the entire Alliance to see evidence of live Terrans after the war. Looking back on it now, I'm kicking myself mentally, but at the time I wouldn't have believed the truth. Zorgrux looked at her datapad with displeasure. Not only had her post been rejected, but she'd been permanently banned from the subforum. The ban message hadn't explained why. She turned back to the strangers. One was filling jars with dirt. Another gingerly lifted a rock into a bag. The third was waving some kind of instrument around. It seemed fairly crude to her, but she honestly had no idea what it did. She hadn't had the need to entertain visitors in the 24 years since she had inherited this farmstead, much less a group of strangers. She searched her brain furiously for a few moments, trying to recall her mother's lessons on hospitality. Suddenly, it came to her. "Food!" she shouted. The strangers turned to her at the sound. If they understood her, they made no indication of it. Zorgrux turned, partly to hide her embarrassment at the outburst, and partly to return to the farmhouse to acquire victuals for the travelling strangers. Once at the house, she grabbed a fresh home-cooked slab of zerg and a roll of Hollock sausage for the travellers. She was halfway out the door again when she decided to grab a bag of gorse as well. Because, why not? Captain Adams looked up from the rover he was assembling. The thing was nearly all together after it had been disassembled to fit in the lander. The alien was back. He supposed it was inaccurate to call them an alien. He was the alien here. Perhaps the native? That didn't feel right. He settled on calling them the local. The local was a round tentacle thing. Their arms seemed split between two types. The shorter and thinner limbs seemed to have sensory organs, like the eye stalks of a snail. The longer and thicker tentacles were for grabbing and holding things. One such tentacle held out a bag towards him. The local made some noises, but he had no way of knowing what or even if that meant anything. The undulating limb shook twice before extending even further towards him. He reached out for the bag and carefully grabbed it. As soon as he had a grip on it, the tentacle released the bag and retracted. He carefully looked inside to see what the local had given him. There was a thick slab of something. It was brown with a beige swirling pattern, and appeared stiff and rubbery. Beside it was a somewhat oily burgundy cylinder, and a brightly coloured foil bag. Captain Adams had no idea what any of this was, but he thanked the local with a quick bow, and went back to finishing the rover. It went together easy enough. It was designed for quick assembly, and he hopped in. "I'm going to set up the weather station on that hill," he said, gesturing to a nearby ridge. The other members of the crew, Private Strongarm and Private Bismuth, nodded, and he handed the bag from the local to Strongarm. "I think this is meant to be food or something. Can you get the FTIR set up and analyze it?" He looked at Strongarm and waited for a response. She seemed incredulous through her suit's visor. "Captain, you aren't seriously planning to eat any of this, are you?" He didn't bother responding. He just laughed as he drove off. He came back a minute later to grab the weather station, and then drove off again, still laughing.